welcome to another Chicago Crossing Model Railroad layout update. Today's update brought to you by the Burlington Zephyr, a brand new set that I bought from Kato. Cool stuff. This is, I don't think, a Zephyr that actually ran to Chicago itself, but nonetheless, it looks at home on a Chicago layout, that's for sure. Well, it's been a busy January, quite a bit done on the layout, quite a bit of new things to talk about with you, including some stuff that I just haven't made content on yet, but which will be useful for you to see and to know. So let's dive right in and get to it. Well, as you probably last saw in one of my videos about dioramas, I've been doing quite a bit of work on this corner building, which houses a currency exchange, and you can certainly see all the details that I pointed out before about the trash pile. Since then, I've added in a little bit more of a diorama drama. You can see up close a couple of seagulls. I had mentioned that I wanted to put gulls in there. Those are actually extremely tiny mini prints models, so you can actually find 3D printed seagulls. The question is whether you can paint the things, and I got to tell you, that was a challenge to even the smallest brushes that I own, especially getting the tiny orange beaks all set up on those models, but actually was able to do that. It just requires a magnifier and a really steady hand and occasionally a little bit of touching up, but seagulls are relatively simple to paint, so it wasn't a big deal. The other couple of details put into this scene include a 3D printed black lab, which, you know, if you have ever owned a black lab or seen one, they are very interested in garbage. That black lab is very interested in garbage. Thankfully, it is on a leash, and its owner is doing her best to try to rein in that dog. So the leash is just a tiny little thread. I actually did manage with a very fine brush to paint a purple collar on the dog, so there actually is a connection there, and that's really cool. There's also a little tabby cat there, which is stretching out before, I suppose, it pounces on the seagulls. The seagulls themselves, much like any gull that you see in Chicago, is entirely unperturbed by the idea of a nearby predator. They'll get away. It's all good. And further down on the layout, I've also been busy with signage, as you can see on this building in the center, which is actually a 3D printed facade of a real building in Chicago. I'm making that a laundromat, and so you can see a sign, Lavanderia Sunshine. That actually is a real business in Chicago, with the same little Starburst logos and things like that. And coming up will be the addition of an interior. I figured now that I've got the exteriors of some of these buildings pretty much well taken care of, the inside's what's next. So I've put in kind of a blanking wall back there, which is just polystyrene, in order to block out the view of all the way in the back of the building, because then you just see wire clips and things like that. So at this point, you know, some of that will be essentially just a decal or photo of the interior of a laundromat, which is put inside, but I also want to add some proper detail items in there. So more to come with respect to that laundromat. And of course, if you had been keeping an eye on the community page, you probably noticed that last month in January, I finished up the version 1.0 of the Light Up Old Style sign. This sign actually does light up. It is made of just a couple of components, actually. You know, signs like this are essentially large, kind of plastic, or I'm not exactly sure what the material is that they use to make them, but nonetheless, basically what this is it's a piece of evergreen plastic, in this case a channel with then a backside of flat styrene placed on. The LED you can kind of see from that pole is coming in through sort of the top. I feel like future versions of this will have the wire come in through the side, but then there's a very tiny LED that is fixed inside, and that basically does light up. If you watch, I'll turn on the switch. Because of cameras and their limited dynamic range, of course, what you're going to see is the thing just completely blank out on you like that. But the sign actually does light up. What a crazy thing that is. And it's super tiny too. You know, I can kind of try to get my finger into view here, and so you can see just how tiny this little sign is. Yeah, that is a small plastruct channel. You know, the easiest thing for making these sorts of things, and again, I'm not quite in a position yet where I actually feel I've got it down without making massive numbers of mistakes to make a video for you, is to try to have as little assembly as possible. And so things like either plastruct or evergreen channels or even the rectangular tubes are great ways to make these. They come in a number of sizes, and so potentially between those you can find a way to assemble the sign at a reasonably prototypical thickness. The LEDs that I use are reasonably bright. I've had to put a few resistors on them in order to dampen down the brightness enough to where the light will actually diffuse properly out of the sign. And even then some. It's not quite perfect. And of course, while I was at it, I figured if I'm going to install that sign, I might as well finish out lighting up the building. So that is precisely what I've done. You can see here the upper floor lights show some windows that are occupied in rooms where there are people and some that are not. I also installed curtains. Those curtains are basically just crepe paper. In the bottom, you know, it's a bar, so I basically just, you know, put in some red clear evergreen plastic behind the glass block. So it's kind of like if you go inside, there's just a bunch of neon signs or something like that, turning it into kind of a red hue. I just sort of like that look. It just makes you feel like it's sort of a dark bar. And of course you can tell, again, that sign is reasonably bright. By eye, it looks fantastic. By camera, it doesn't quite. Another element of scenery that I've also been working on are these barricades over here. These are jersey barriers, and I've set them up to essentially create sort of a pathway along the, through the abandoned track over to Bridgeport Metals over there. And these are actually really nice. So these models are actually wood, and I really like working with wood for concrete. It sounds ironic or weird, but it's actually true. And there's a number of different reasons. Number one is you can really have that stuff hold paint in a really nice way. It takes wet on wet technique really nicely for doing some things like, you can kind of see some of this, rust of some of the rebar rusting through on those aged things. You can also put in, as you can see here, cracking and spalling of the concrete really well. It takes to that really well. And all these are basically just little wooden three-piece models. You can see one that's just gotten sort of its cover paint there. These are all made from Osborne Models kits. And the key thing you have to do is just you have to sand them down and make sure that you get rid of some of the patterning that's on there. But once you do that, I find that these are just phenomenal little model items. And likewise, I've also been doing much more work over on this scene. So coming back out, you can tell that's kind of that grassy abandoned endpoint to that more or less dead spur, which is now just used to house that trackmobile. And so I wanted it to look much more neglected, which means basically taking a lot of the static grass up into, and other plant life, up into where the bumper is itself. So in this case, the fact that there's a bunch of overgrowth there means that, yeah, the spur really isn't used for anything other than storage of the trackmobile. And at the same time, it also just provides a little bit more green in that space, and some nice contrast between the tracks that are used. So a further addition to the layout has been to continue working with piles of garbage and industrial refuse and stuff like that. What you can see here is basically a trash pile that's sitting over by the grain mill. And I've got a couple of various bits and bobs over there, including 2 dumpsters. If you take a look at it from the other side, you also see just a bunch of discarded boxes and things like that, all of which are kind of nice little elements to have in a scene of this sort. So basically shows you there's a lot of refuse over there. They're pulling things out of boxes. The one box you can kind of see right there, it's got a little smile on it, so somebody actually had something ordered from Amazon. The setting of this is 1997. Amazon didn't really exist in this form, but what the hell. Sometimes a little bit of anachronism is okay. So I was happy to put that in. And that is all part of a project of continuing to kind of make these garbage areas look a little bit more realistic. I likewise added some graffiti using one of the jelly roll pens to the other dumpster, and used a couple of the other fine tip micro pens that I have. Those things are great for adding graffiti. They really do add quite a bit of an element of interest to those trash bins. And so that is an ongoing project, but I'm pretty happy where things are with respect to just kind of creating these little urban scenes of blight or garbage or whatever the heck it is. And one last fun bit on the layout is this figure here. So as you probably noticed earlier when I was talking about seagulls and black dogs, I also picked up a number of train crew figures. You can see one guy leaning against the hood of the truck here. That is one of the Mini Prince crew figures. And these are actually a lot of fun to paint. It's been a while since I've painted figurines. I've certainly never painted them at 1/160th scale. 1/72nd, I think, is about the smallest I've gotten in terms of figurines. But this was actually great fun. It worked really well. I use Vallejo paints. Those have really good pigment and really good grip on resin. So in this case, I painted the guy with a safety vest that actually has the silver reflective striping on there using tiny brushes. He is wearing a Sox hat, which you can see that little Sox logo of a sort on there. That is sort of a shout out to a viewer who's wondered when I'm going to actually put in some Sox signs or something like that. I figure we'll start small, and here's a guy with a White Sox hat. Unfortunately, he is on the near north side, so maybe his hat is not exactly welcome, but nonetheless, he looks really good. And again, all of us who have these model railroads, we don't quite realize how tiny these figures are, but I tell you, when you're painting those, you really start to notice how tiny they are. All of that work is done through a magnifier, because otherwise you really cannot see quite what you're doing. Well, that will pretty much do it for the month of January and part of the month of February here on Chicago Crossing Model Railroad. Thanks for tuning in to this layout update, and looking forward to sharing more progress and more videos with you in the coming month. Take care.